Welcome to the Full Moon Film Buff, episode 61. We're going to talk about Loba from 1965. I bought this DVD from Trash Palace. I had not seen this before. As always, we begin with the prominent crew and cast. The film was directed by Rafael Belladon, written by Ramon Oban, with effects by Antonio Munoz Ravello, billed as Antonio Munoz R. We discussed Rafael Belladon when we covered The Man and the Monster. Antonio Munoz Ravello also did the makeup effects on the Panther Women. The cast includes Kitty de Hoyos as Clarissa Fernandez, Jose Elias Moreno as Professor Fernandez, Adriana Roel as Alicia Fernandez, Columbia Dominguez as Marcela de Fernandez, Joaquin Cordero as Dr. Alejandro Bernstein, Roberto Caneda as Dr. Gonzalez, Noe Murayama as Cazador de Lobos, Crox Alvaredo as Crumba, Ramon Bugani as the Inspector, Judith Dupirion as Adelita, and Jorge Rusek as the Commissario. As I've said before, I have trouble tracking down information, but what I can find indicates this was a cast of well-known actors working in Mexico at the time. This was a high-budget production, not a bunch of unknowns. I loved this story. This is a fun and melodramatic take on the werewolf story. That said, the print I was able to watch was unfortunately not great. I'm 99% certain that it looked and sounded better when it was first released, but at least the copy I saw has degraded over time, which made me a little sad. Let's move on to the synopsis. A crypt in a rural graveyard opens, and a werewolf sneaks into the dark night under the full moon. She violently kills a camper and a married couple out collecting firewood. A lawman of some kind finds the camper. A buggy driver finds the couple. The werewolf climbs back into the coffin to reveal some kind of hidden passageway. Once safely inside, she reverts to her human form, a stunning young lady named Clarissa. The buggy driver is Dr. Alejandro Bernstein. He shows up at the werewolf's home and is warmly greeted by her father, Professor Fernandez. Turns out Alejandro wants to marry Clarissa, but Dad is nervous about this. Meanwhile, the law investigates the deaths. The werewolf tore out their hearts, I assume to eat them. Dr. Gonzalez, the medical examiner, takes a blood sample from the victims. He's going to test it at the professor's lab and learn what attacked the victims. Professor wants to work with Alejandro on metaplasia. He shows off his lab. Alejandro is studying cellular mutations, specifically what could allow a human to turn into a wolf. I wonder why he's interested in that subject. Alejandro is not surprised by any of this lycanthropy talk at all. It turns out Clarissa doesn't even know she's a werewolf. She remembers everything as a dream. Clarissa is also teaching a servant's deaf and mute daughter named Adelita to read. Dr. Gonzalez shows up, and it turns out that he's in love with Alicia, Clarissa's sister. She wants out of her dad's home. Clarissa and Alicia are locked in their rooms by a beefy gypsy servant named Crumbo every full moon. Dr. Gonzalez and the professor test the blood. It changes under the microscope. The professor tells Alejandro that there's no way he's going to be allowed to marry Clarissa. Alejandro is pretty sure he will. After Dr. Gonzalez leaves, Alejandro starts feeling poorly. Atalita sneaks out of the estate at night to play with some toys by a ruin. A male werewolf, I wonder who this could be, hunts her. Out of nowhere, a dog attacks the werewolf and they fight. Now the dog is doing pretty well, but its owner calls it back since he doesn't know what it's fighting. Atalita gets back home safely and sneaks into her room with Mom none the wiser. The wounded werewolf makes it back too, reverting into Alejandro, injured but alive. He blames a werewolf for his injuries, but we know better. Professor cryogenically freezes Alejandro's body to keep him from dying. Meanwhile, the lawman arrests the dog's owner as the killer, since the dog, whose name is Jack by the way, has blood on his muzzle. The owner says Jack is a dog that is trained to kill werewolves. The guy, who's only ever called Wolf Hunter, knows about the victim's missing hearts. He's also got an ivory werewolf killing knife. He's heard that there's a werewolf around here, and he and Jack are on the case. The professor tells everyone that Alejandro had to leave for a few days. Clarissa's mom learns the truth and accidentally locks herself in with Alejandro. She then completes her screw-up by thawing out the werewolf. She dies as a consequence. Now, the professor thinks that Clarissa killed her own mother. They hold a family funeral. The werewolf hunter sets a trap. Adelita sneaks into Clarissa's room to play with her stuff. Dr. Gonzalez has to head north to see patients. He passes the inspector, who is on his way to warn Fernandez and his family. Clarissa plays a mean piano. Alicia gets upset for some reason I did not understand. Surprise, Dad knows Clarissa is a werewolf. Crumbo forces Clarissa to her room and locks her in it as she starts to transform. Atalita hides and sees the whole thing. She escapes and runs back to the ruins. La Loba pursues. Atalita climbs as high as she can to try and get to a safe place. The werewolf hunter follows both. La Loba attacks him. Meanwhile, back at the hacienda, Professor is getting ready to destroy his daughter with his own ivory werewolf killing knife when Alejandro busts out of the recovery room as El Lobo. He kills the professor easily and is going for Alicia when Crumbo steps in. Crumbo fights amazingly, but after a lot of property damage, El Lobo kills him. Alicia uses that time to wisely flee. The inspector shows up just as La Loba kills the werewolf hunter. He picks up the ivory knife just as La Loba jumps him. While that fight happens, Dr. Gonzalez rescues the girl. Alicia steps into the werewolf hunter's trap. Before El Lobo can kill her, Dr. Gonzalez steps in to defend her. He's losing, but he hangs on just long enough for the hero we all deserve to show up. It's Jack. He tears El Lobo to pieces. The inspector stabs La Loba. The pair of dying werewolves crawl to each other, changing back to human form in each other's arms. Meanwhile, Jack mourns his dead owner. The saddest part of the entire movie as far as I'm concerned. Okay, the transformations are not the best, even if we take into account this was made in the 60s. I don't care much. The filmmakers didn't waste a lot of time or effort on transformation. That isn't the point. The makeup jobs are also a bare bones approach. They get the job done, they convey that we're looking at werewolves, but they're not anything fantastic. There also isn't a lot of werewolf lore here. The full moon does seem to be important. Ivory replaces silver as the true weakness of werewolves, but everything else is basic and standard. So let's move on to themes. La Loba is a great example of melodrama, so let's review what that is. Melodrama is characterized by its heightened emotions and theatrical dialogue, often veering into bombastic and excessively sentimental expressions. Within this genre, characters tend to be portrayed flatly, conforming to generic stereotypes. Melodramas typically unfold in the intimate realm of the home, emphasizing themes such as morality, family dynamics, love, and marriage. They frequently involve star-crossed lovers facing conflicts fueled by external interferences, poor communication, and challenges from outside sources. Minor hurdles become mountains, and every setback becomes a tragedy of epic proportions. When performed, melodramas are accompanied by dramatic and suggestive music. While melodrama is sometimes associated with overacting, it's actually more about emphasizing the emotional response to a situation. When done right, melodrama hooks viewers and makes them emotionally invested in the characters. Melodramas prioritize clarity over subtlety. In modern contexts, melodrama is often used as a pejorative term, suggesting a lack of subtlety in character development, but I don't think that's always the case and not always a bad thing. So let's evaluate La Loba as a melodrama. The film is populated by stock characters, some of whom don't even get names. We have our star-crossed lovers, our werewolf pair destined to die together. The story doesn't make much logical sense, but it does have strong emotional intensity. The story is mostly set at the Fernandez home. I could see this being extended and adapted into a telenovela. There does seem to be a telenovela named La Loba, but what little I could glean about it does not sound like a werewolf story, so I'm not planning on watching it, unless I hear from one of you guys that it actually is a story. So in conclusion, if you like lycanthropes, like, share, and subscribe. Contribute your thoughts and additional observations in the comments below. Let me know what I missed or what you noticed. Next, I plan on discussing Full Moon High from 1981. Keep your eye on the moon, a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you back here next episode.